And just to give you a brief outline of the talk, I want to talk a little bit about population aging, which I know all of you are very well familiar with, and a little bit of a background of older volunteers, and then recruiting and retaining older volunteers in volunteer programs, and then share with you a program that I've had the good fortune to be involved with called the Experience Corps, and tell you a little bit about the health outcomes for older adults from that program, as well as the academic outcomes for children who are served by the older adults in elementary schools, and then implications and future directions from this work. So, as you're probably well aware, we have different societal images of aging. Probably the most common one through the years has been aging as a time of loss and decrepitude. That aging is just sort of counting up the losses, sort of counting up the wrinkles, and shrinking life space, and that you have fewer and fewer resources, and you do less and less, and disengage from society. That's been the predominant point of view. I know that's not a view that any of you in this room share, but that's how many people think of the aging and the aging process. Then there's another point of view, aging as unlimited leisure time. That people who are free of work roles and no longer have parenting responsibilities, now it's just time to play. That is, aging is kind of a Disney World kind of idea. But then there's another paradigm that's been emerging as aging as productive engagement. That as we get older, we can continue to remain engaged and productive, and even though we may not be in work roles any longer or parenting roles, that we can still participate meaningfully and actively in society. And that's really the paradigm that underscores all of the work that I'm going to be talking about today. So when we think about the aging population, there's a real need to reset our thinking and go through kind of a frame change in terms of aging, not viewing the aging population as a problem, but rather as a resource. And Mark Friedman, who's one of the co-developers of the Experience Corps program, called older adults our only growing natural resource, which I really love that quote, because it really does emphasize this notion of how do we tap into the talent, the experience, the wisdom of older people, and harness that energy in service of society. And that's really the challenge here. So you're all well aware of the changing demographics in the population in terms of a growing older population, not only here in our country, but globally. And we talk about this aging wave or silver tsunami that is sweeping the globe. And I don't want to bore you with a lot of demographic statistics here this morning, but each day there are over 5,500 people who reach their 65th birthdays. And each day more than 4,500 celebrate their 75th birthdays. So this is incremental. It's not dramatic each day, but over the long run, it makes a huge difference in terms of the demographics of society. This particular graph shows you the world population aged 65 and above and individuals aged below 5 years. And you notice over there on the left side of the graph that back in 1900 that there were twice as many children as there were older adults. But that difference has been shrinking such that this year, 2015, for the first time in human history, there are as many older adults as there are young children. Never happened before. In fact, that's happened in some countries already, like Japan, where there's more older adults than children. And if you look at what happens here, the older adults there are in the green line, and the children in the blue line, projecting into the future, by 2050, there are going to be over twice as many seniors as there are going to be children. And who knows how, and notice the curves are diverging there, so this trend is going to continue in the far foreseeable future with profound implications in terms of intergenerational relationships and the whole nature of the population. Here is one more slide on demographics. Here you get an idea of the demographic shift over time. The top, you see the pyramids on the left there for developed countries at the top and for less developed regions at the bottom. And you notice that it's a fairly broad base here with lots of young people. As you go up the pyramid, there are fewer old people. But when you shift your gaze to the right of the slide, you see in 2050 that the pyramid becomes more like a rectangle, right? So there are more and more people up in the older ages, and the base of the pyramid isn't growing. In fact, it looks like it's shrinking. And notice here that this is happening not only in developed countries, but also developing countries. In fact, the pace of population aging is even more rapid in the developing countries. As you notice in the bottom there, that pyramid suddenly becomes more rectangular. So the fact that people are living longer all over the world has given rise to this notion of successful or robust aging, that we're not just adding life to years, but we're lengthening our active life expectancy so that the quality of living is as important as the quantity of years that you've lived. So this notion of successful aging, the MacArthur Successful Aging Network has done a lot of research on this notion, and Jack Rowe and Bob Kahn talk about successful aging as being comprised of three components: avoiding disease and disability, maintaining high cognitive and physical functioning, and engagement with life. And to the extent that you can remain disability-free and disease-free and engage with life, to that extent, you can be said to be aging successfully. That volunteering is a paradigm that really fits squarely within the successful aging model, because it shows a way for people to remain engaged as they get older. And here on the right side of the slide, you see, I think everybody would agree, an example of a successful ager who is a 102-year-old marathon runner. I want to introduce a few more definitions here that are going to be important for what I'm going to be talking about. One is social engagement, one form of engagement. Social engagement, that the performance of leisure or productive activities within the context of friendship, kinships, and membership roles, including volunteer and civic service roles. So that's part of volunteering, this notion of social engagement. And then we have this idea of social capital, that the connections among individuals, their social networks, and the norms of reciprocity and trustworthiness that develop from those networks. That's what we mean by social capital, and we place a value on that social capital. Just like economic concepts of human capital, the social networks themselves, the groupings, the collectives, are thought to have value that we can monetize, that we can look at as a collective force for the good of society. Now, many of you may have read the book Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, who is a public policy professor at Harvard University. And about 15 years ago, Putnam wrote this book where he put forth the premise that the social bonds of our society are starting to pull apart. That by many measures of social and civic and fraternal organizational involvement, that the trend is downward, that we're joining fewer groups. The PTA membership in the Elks and other social groups, voting participation. All of this kind of group behavior has been decreasing over time. And he uses this metaphor of bowling because The number of bowlers is at an all-time high, believe it or not. But the number of people that are bowling in leagues is at an all-time low. So people are bowling alone. And when they bowl alone, they don't get the benefit of social interaction. They don't get the benefit of being with friends, and you can talk about civic issues and other issues. You're bowling alone. Now, there's some evidence to suggest that this trend is starting to reverse itself, and even Putnam acknowledges that. There's some controversy about this hypothesis, but it's an intriguing notion that the social fabric of our society has been ripped apart, and we need to find ways to sort of knit it back together again. So here is some data from the second supplement on aging study that looks at the amount of activity that people 70 and older report over time. And different social activities like contact with your friends or neighbors, attending church or temple, attending movies, club, group events, going out to a restaurant, and over there on the right, volunteering work over the past 12 months. And you notice here that the trend in all those social activities is downward. So it suggests that we become less active as we age, even though if you look at volunteering trends over time, it's really the group 65 and older that's showing the increase in volunteering relative to other age groups. But as we get older, we tend to engage less in social activity. So here's just a quick snapshot of senior volunteerism, that about a quarter of Americans, 65 and older, volunteer. Right now we have something in the order of 10.6 million older volunteers. If you look at the value of that volunteering, it's in the order of about more than $4 billion. And by 2020, it's projected that we'll have about 13 million older volunteers here in the U.S. Now, there are well-known and well-documented health benefits from volunteering, and I've listed some of them on the slide here. Increased longevity and reduced mortality is an important one. Increased physical ability, increased ratings of self-rated health, reduced depression, increased life satisfaction, and improved quality of life. So those are all part of being a volunteer, and those benefits go beyond the individual and extend to social benefits for society. And so you have this notion of social engagement for older adults through volunteerism and having a role-less role for older adults, and that's what retirement has sometimes been described as a role-less role. You retire, but what do you retire to? So in contrast to that, you have productive, meaningful activities, the possibility of wisdom and further growth, this notion of generativity, which is very important for aging, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, an evolution in images of aging towards more positive images, this notion of social capital and the benefits that come with that, and a vehicle for health promotion, that volunteering and social engagement is a way of promoting health at a population level. So we have this engagement hypothesis that has been around in the literature, and it suggests that age-related declines in mental functioning to some extent may be mitigated by a life marked by social and intellectual engagement. And usually those are very broad-based effects. They tend to be correlational effects, so that we correlate the amount of intellectual activity or social activity with the benefits of that activity. So we don't know, it's sort of a chicken and egg problem. We don't know what leads to what. Is it that people who are more socially active do better on different tasks, or people who read more or go to more plays or whatever do better and keep their mental vitality longer, or is it people who are already mentally vital and socially active do those things? So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, but nevertheless there is some very strong correlational evidence here. And I wanted to share with you some of the evidence here that is from a very large literature, and I think is very profoundly important in terms of understanding these relationships. This is from MacArthur Studies of Successful Aging, Tara Grunwald, who is one of our colleagues on the Experience Tour project. And what they did is simply ask people the question, very simple question, how useful do you feel to other people? How useful do you feel? Do you feel you matter? And people who said that they rarely or never felt that they were useful to others were at about a 2 to 3-fold risk of developing disability and dying within 7 years. So people who felt useless, people who felt that they didn't matter, didn't make a difference, no one really cared about them, were at much higher risk for these negative health outcomes. Here's another study from the EPI studies that looks at the amount of social integration and cognitive decline, or risk of cognitive decline, over a 12-year period. And you notice that the more social ties you have, the less likely you are to develop cognitive decline. And I think it goes along exactly with what the governor was saying earlier about the importance of family ties, social relationships, that these kind of relationships have a direct bearing on people's health, in this case, their cognitive health. One last slide here from this literature, looking at social integration and 3-year incidence of dementia. Here again, people who have very few social relationships and aren't integrated well socially are at about an 8-fold risk of developing dementia over only a 3-year period of time. So there's a strong correlation here between the level of social integration and whether you have satisfying social relationships and the likelihood of developing dementia. So I mentioned this notion of generativity earlier, which is a notion that Erik Erikson introduced in the literature. And it's a notion that as we get older, it becomes important for us to leave a legacy and to think about passing on our ideas and thoughts and works on to the next generation. And so that's really part of this meaningful engagement idea, that leaving the world off as a better place for subsequent generations. And so this hypothesis around generativity is that these generative roles, if you can create generative, meaningful roles, including volunteer roles, that might be a vehicle to attract older adults, because that's what motivates us. We want to leave the world off as a better place. And we can intentionally design roles that have physical, cognitive, and social activity and provide very stimulating environments. And that this might be a population-based way to improve the health of the nation by creating these meaningful roles and trying to attract older adults to these roles. And we know as a society we face major health challenges. We're living longer. It's been estimated that many of us can expect to live a third of their lives post age 65. As I said, as many older adults as children. We want to try to optimize the health status of those older adults. And we want to try to compress morbidity into a smaller and smaller window at the end of life. We don't want to have people living longer, but lengthening those lives also means more frailty and more chronic illness. And we also know that many standard intervention programs don't reach older adults who really need to be reached. Either they aren't asked to be involved in the programs, or they don't sign up, or they sign up and drop out. And so we have that problem. And there's this scarce competition between generations for resources. And which programs do you fund? Do you fund programs for seniors? Do you fund programs for youth, adolescents? Do you fund programs for infants and young children? Where do you allocate very scarce dollars? And then trying to educate the next generation is a strong predictor of their future health status. So education is really key here to the future health and well-being of the population. So what we want to try to do is create a win-win and target roles that meet unmet needs in society. and create a win-win for children as well as older adults, and not sort of pit the generations against each other. That's really kind of the notion here. And one such model for a win-win is what's called Experience Corps. And this is high-intensity volunteering. By that I mean that people who volunteer for this program agree to volunteer for at least 15 hours a week. That sounds like a lot, and it is. In fact, many of our volunteers volunteer more than 15 hours a week. But this is what the schools told us it would take to really become part of the family of the school and really sort of make a difference in the lives of the children. And so we've used that figure as our definition of high intensity. These are high impact roles in elementary schools that we intentionally create for the seniors. And we establish what we call a critical mass. So in Baltimore City, we, for each school that we go into, we may place 15, 20, sometimes 25 older volunteers in the school. So we don't just put one or two in the school. And walking in an urban school setting, and many of these are under-resourced schools, can be overwhelming. You think, well, as a single individual, there's nothing I can do about it. It's beyond my capacity. But if you go in with a team of older adults, and we place these teams in waves in schools because schools can't absorb 25 older volunteers all at one time, we place them in waves, and by being part of this community, by being part of a team, then there's a tremendous sense of what we call collective efficacy, that you feel that you can make a difference by being a part of this group. And so we think that kind of critical mass, flooding the schools with older volunteers, will shift the outcomes for the schools and the students, create a force for social benefit, and create social networks and friendships for the senior volunteers. And within this, there's a health promotion program embedded. And here's one of our ads that we use to recruit seniors into this program. And notice the messages on this announcement here. Do you want to make a difference for your community, for the children in your community? And at the bottom here, for yourself. We tend to de-emphasize this as a health promotion program in the sense of how we present it to seniors. We say, well, if you're volunteering and you're helping the children, in the process you'll help yourselves. But that's not sort of what motivates people to get involved. What motivates people is this generativity notion, that people want to come into the program because they want to help the kids. Many times they've had children or grandchildren at these schools. They see the schools deteriorating. They want to bring the schools back. They want to make a difference. And many of these are neighborhood schools that they go into, and by making this difference, they're sharing their wisdom, their knowledge, all their skills, and that has a tremendous empowering capability to older adults, feeling that they matter, that my wisdom isn't outdated, that I still have something to contribute, and that people value me and respect me, and that there's a difference I can make. And so this is really what draws people in. In this case, these are folks 60 and older who we were recruiting into this Baltimore Experience Corps program. And we think that older adults can be a tremendous source of social capital for urban education. That urban public schools furnish the education of the majority of children in the U.S. They're the most under-resourced schools, and they lack the human capital to meet their educational mission. Many of these schools, the teachers, there's sort of a revolving door in terms of the teachers. It's hard to recruit teachers and keep them. And older adults can offer this caring, consistent model for the kids and be role models and to help in general support the needs of the children in a large-scale way. So here's the Experience Corps model. As I said, 60 and older. They serve in public elementary schools from K through 3rd grade. These are meaningful roles. They involve things like literacy development and mathematical skill building, classroom behavioral management. So We're very clear with the schools and with the volunteers that these are meaningful roles. The volunteer isn't in there as a teacher's aide or to staple papers or sort through files. That's not what this is. It's not busy work, it's not just activity, but it's really meaningful engagement with the children and with the schools. It's high intensity, as I said, sustained dose. Volunteers sign up for at least 1 year, and in our study they signed up actually for 2 full school years. There's this critical mass in each school. We do stipend the volunteers. We get AmeriCorps grants from the state as well as from the federal government, and we provide a modest stipend each month. It's about $250, and we think that that stipend is very important in terms of recognizing the value of the contribution of the volunteers. And it's also a way that they can use those expenses to pay transportation costs. They can pay for their lunches, and many of them even take that stipend and reinvest it in the school. And so we've had many cases where volunteers actually purchase school materials and bring them in. We had one older volunteer who used part of his stipend to buy a graduation suit for a young child who couldn't afford a suit. And so it's a way, again, of creating opportunities for seniors to give back to the schools through these stipends. And we think the stipends really do make a difference. Many older adults, many of these are lower SES older adults who are living on very fixed incomes, limited resources. Without this stipend, we feel that they may not be able to actually become engaged in volunteering. And we have this multiple health behaviors that we track, and we aim for diversity. We try to be as inclusive as possible. There are certain standards we have to meet in terms of, we do background checks on people. There are certain literacy standards that have to be met. And we want to make sure that whoever we place in the school is able to carry out the roles. But short of that, we're very inclusive in terms of background characteristics of the volunteers. In Baltimore City, the majority of volunteers are African American women from the schools around the area where we have the Experience Corps program. And we've been trying to attract older men and trying to use different messages to attract older men. Have been somewhat successful in that effort, although we still have a long way to go. As I said, we try to create these meaningful roles for older adults in terms of academic support, math support, computer support, conflict resolution, attendance monitors. We have parental outreach workers to increase the connection between the schools and the parents. We even have what we call an asthma club, where we think of older volunteers as not only helping in the classroom, but as sort of public health agents for change. And many of these older volunteers are themselves suffering from respiratory conditions, and we have them meeting with young children who also suffer from respiratory conditions to share information about the condition, and just as a source of support. And we know asthma, at least in Baltimore City, and I suspect it may be true here in Rhode Island as well, in Providence, and other major cities, that asthma is one of the leading causes of school absence. And if children aren't at school, they're not learning anything. So we think that this is a way of enlarging the role for older adults around these volunteering activities. So here's one of our star volunteers. It's hard to tell who's having more fun in this picture. This is a retired Social Security administrator who raised a large family, and she's working with third grade classroom here on a reading exercise. Just notice how engaged the kids are, and they're all raising their hand. There's just this wonderful interaction going on. And she's been a wonderful ambassador for the program, and has continued for many, many years to serve as one of our star volunteers. Here's another volunteer who is a retired civil engineer, And he learned about Experience Corps through the AARP mailing list. And he said he thought it was a good opportunity to help out. And in fact, many of our volunteers tell us that it's the single most meaningful thing that they've ever done in their lives. You know, and many of these volunteers are very accomplished. They've done many, many wonderful things in their lives, but many tell us that, you know, nothing compares to this experience of mentoring these young children, seeing the smiling faces, restoring hope in these children, and bringing back the schools to a level that they might have been, you know, years ago. And here's another volunteer who is retired school system building supervisor, had no children of his own but wanted to volunteer. And he said it's something to keep me going. And we hear that again and again and again. These volunteers are saying, it gives me a purpose to get out of bed in the morning. You know, the kids are waiting for me. They need me. They're depending on me. And it really is a motivator for these volunteers. So a number of years ago, after the program, it was co-developed in the mid-1990s by Linda Freed, who was then at Johns Hopkins, a geriatrician who's now the dean of the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University, and Mark Friedman, who I quoted earlier. They co-developed the program in the mid-1990s. There was a national demonstration of feasibility that was done in the mid-1990s. And then we did a small study in Baltimore City with 6 schools and about 150 volunteers. And we randomized the schools to either the Experience Corps program or a control condition without the program. And we partnered with a local community organization, the Greater Homewood Community Corporation, who were very experienced with dealing with the local communities. They knew the schools, and so we partnered with them. And we assessed the participants, the volunteers at the beginning, and then again at the end of the school year. And I just want to share with you a few of the findings from that initial study, which really were very encouraging. Here you see the change in blocks walked per week. And on the left, you see the people who are in the Experience Corps program. Big increase in the number of blocks reported walked per week versus the control, where there was actual decrease. And we actually outfit many of the volunteers with what we call step activity counters that records number of steps per day. And it's a way of objectively measuring physical activity, and we find that there are big increases. That you don't necessarily have to join an exercise club, or might not be able to afford to join an exercise club, or may not stick with exercise routine. But through this kind of program, you get a lot of physical activity. Just getting down those long hallways in many of these schools and up and down those little chairs in the classroom is a lot of exercise. And it shows up not only in self-reports like this, but also in objectively measured physical activities through the step monitors. Here are the number of TV hours per day. The intervention group actually went down, which we interpreted as a good thing. TV watching, which many, many older adults do increasingly, is not something that is necessarily been shown to promote your physical and cognitive health and well-being. The control group actually went up, but the volunteers were, busy volunteering. They reported that they weren't watching as much TV each day. Here's some data on social support. And the Experience Corps volunteers are in the green bars here. The controls are in the red bars. And so notice here, wanting more emotional support, the Experience Corps, you can interpret that as meaning that they felt less the need for emotional support because those needs were being met through this volunteering experience. Feeling I make a difference. Then notice the volunteers were higher in feeling that they make a difference, feeling that others need me, number of people around to support you, number of reported social ties. All of those were very positive benefits of participating in this program. And so we're creating community here. It's not like you have to necessarily go to a retirement community to have benefit of other people around you. And this community continued after the volunteers were through participating in the program. Notice here the number that said that they still talk to friends from the Experience Corps. They talk at least once a week. They visit with their friends. A very sizable proportion of the volunteers continue to interact with their team after they were through with the volunteering experience. We asked them, what do you like about Experience Corps? What keeps you involved? Well, the fellowship with other volunteers is one of the main reasons. The friendships, the sharing the same goals, people of your same age group, being part of a team. All of those were very, very important reasons why these volunteers kept involved in the program. And in fact, our retention rates were very, very high. Well over 80% of volunteers come back year to year. So you always worry about volunteer programs having a large dropout rate. We don't see it as much here in the Experience Corps because people do form these relationships, they're meaningful, and they stay in the program. We also looked at cognitive health and gave volunteers a series of cognitive performance tests, including memory tests and tests of psychomotor speed, something we call executive function, which is basically your ability to organize your activity and make decisions. And the yellow bars here are the Experience Corps people, and the blue bars are the controls. And on all of these measures, the Experience Corps volunteers outperformed the controls. So it was having a positive impact on cognition. Lower on these right ones means that they're speedier, they're reacting more quickly. So we did a study with a subgroup of the volunteers. This is called the Brain Health Sub-Study, where these are the demographics of that group. And we brought people in at the beginning of the school year and at the end of the school year, and we did MRI imaging. We took pictures of the brain. And we wanted to see whether or not this Experience Corps high-impact volunteering activity made a more fundamental difference. It just didn't increase activity and increase people's life satisfaction, but fundamentally it was altering something on a more basic level. And many of our volunteers, when they signed up for this in droves, they really were very fascinated with this notion of, you can grow new neurons as you get older and sprout new connections, that you don't simply lose brain cells as you get older. And that's been in the news now for quite a while, and people are aware of that. And so we wanted to document whether this program had effect on brain activity. And in fact, it did. On the left there, you see an image of the brain, and the little blue spots you see there are places where the volunteers had more brain activities in areas of the brain that you would expect. So areas of the brain that had to do with controlling your attention and concentration. Areas of the brain, the frontal lobes on both sides of the brain, showed more activation. So people seem to be able to organize their activity better and to resist distraction and to plan because they were part of activities in the school that really tapped into those abilities. And on the right there, within the scanner, when they were in the scanner, we actually gave them a series of cognitive tests, and the Experience Corps in the blue here were doing much better on those tests than the control group. And in the actual brain scans, it showed up in terms of more brain activation. And so we gave each senior a brain scan that they could take home and put on their refrigerator. And they loved that. And, it was evidence, it was concrete evidence that this program was doing many things at many different levels, including, some of them would say things like, well, this program, I just feel I have fewer cobwebs in my brain. Things are just clear. I can think more sharply and quickly. And we had a number of reports like that, and the evidence would bear that out. Here you see relationship between the number of steps you take each day. We had as I said, people wear these step activity monitors on their ankles for about 3 days. And then we looked at the number of steps that they took, or that they averaged per day, as well as peak bouts of daily activity within 10-minute blocks. What were the most active periods of the day? And then we looked at, we did what's called structural MRI imaging, and looked at the volume of people's hippocampus, which the hippocampus is a brain structure that's connected with memory, specifically things like verbal and spatial memory. And the larger the volume, it is a good thing. You want a large hippocampus. And so the number of steps here was correlated in a positive direction with hippocampal volume. So the more steps that people took, and the program improved the number of steps, the larger the hippocampal volume. Again, evidence that this program was having a very beneficial effect at a very basic brain level. And what was very interesting is that we found even small or moderate doses of physical activity were a good thing. It wasn't like you had to get out there and run a marathon to show benefit. Even in very low intensity activity, people still were showing benefit. And this is just some of the evidence. We just actually had a paper published very recently. Michelle Carlson, who's part of our team who leads this brain health sub-study, just published this paper showing these results. So we also are very interested in evaluating this program in terms of the economics. And this program, we have a health economist who works with us who looks at the cost of the program in comparison to things like decreased medical care costs and gains in quality of life for the volunteers. And he collected some administrative data on the program. You see the numbers here. I don't want to make too much of the numbers because these are from a few years ago. They're from Baltimore City schools, and these numbers may be different for different communities and different size schools. But on average, the cost for implementing the program was about $64,000. And that included the stipends for the volunteers, which we got from AmeriCorps funding, as I said. And they included hiring someone to actually coordinate the program at the school level, and the cost of training the volunteers. The volunteers go through a week-long training process before they're ever placed in the schools. And then we do a lot of in-service training with the volunteers and retraining, and all of that has some cost attached with it. So on average, it's about $64,000 for these 15 hours of volunteering. And we're linking the cost to the changes in health status of the volunteers. And if you look at the preliminary results, then based on just change over 8 months over the course of one school year, in terms of savings in medical care costs, quality of life improvements, that would not be enough to justify a program like Experience Corps. If you just looked at it short term, and if you just looked at outcomes for the seniors in 1 year, would not justify, at least on a cost basis, the program. But if you factor in everything and take the long-term view, including all the effects that are possible with the program, then it becomes a very cost-effective program. And if you look at things like educational attainment, teacher retention for the children, it doesn't take much to make this program cost-effective. In fact, our health economist tells us that it would take 1 in 200 children exposed to the program in each school to change from not graduating from high school to graduating to make this have a favorable return on investment. Just 1 child out of 200 children. So when you factor in lifetime earnings from that child, reduced likelihood of criminal activity involvement, incarceration, and a host of other factors, it becomes very cost effective. And here you see sort of the scale here, trying to weigh the factors. In the short term, the costs of starting up the program and implementing the program outweigh the benefits, both at the school level and the benefits for older adults in terms of compressing morbidity and improving quality of life. But if you look in the long term, and look at the children's benefits, the school's benefits, the benefits to the senior volunteers, all of those benefits then tilt the scale in the direction of a cost savings. So taking the long-term view, it's a cost-effective program. Now, we were able to do a much larger study beginning in the fall of 2006 of Experience Corps in Baltimore City, where we had over 700 people who were randomized either into the Experience Corps condition or the control condition. These people were called low-activity controls. These are more like usual volunteering activities. You'll volunteer maybe once or twice a week at a community meals program or in a nursing home or whatever, the kind of usual activities versus this kind of high-impact activity in Experience Corps. And we looked at many of the same outcomes in this larger study, as well as this brain health sub-study where we did these MRIs on a much larger group of people. And here's our research team. It really is true that it takes a village to do this kind of work. We had a large and very experienced and interdisciplinary research team from across the country who helped us out with this. And of course, we couldn't have done any of this work without generous funding from the National Institute on Aging through the program project grant that we received from them and many supplements to that grant. We had also foundation support from several foundations, including Weinberg, Erickson, and of course AmeriCorps for the stipends for the volunteers. And I don't have all the data to share with you today from this larger trial that we've done and have completed, but the volunteers are averaging almost 22 hours a week working in the program. The members report that they value the program, they value working with children, learning new things, socializing with other older adults. Last year in Baltimore City, these volunteers contributed service over 100,000 service hours of volunteering to the Baltimore school system. High member satisfaction, and the teachers in turn were very highly satisfied with the volunteers that were placed within their classroom. So it really is a win-win-win. It's a win for the volunteers, for the children, and for the schools. Now, I mentioned that we're also monitoring the effects on the children in the schools, and we're hypothesizing that there will be improvements in academics and in behavior and reduce student absenteeism, and particularly chronic absenteeism. And those are the folks where students were really worried about, where they're absent 20 or more school days per year. They're just never there, or rarely there. We think that school climate will improve, and people will see the schools as a better environment for learning. And it will increase student or teacher retention. And there'll also be this direct association between these improvements in the children and in the schools and with volunteer retention and satisfaction. We haven't totally explored that hypothesis yet, but we think that there's going to be a close relationship between how well the schools do and the children and how satisfied the volunteers are and how likely they are to be retained. Just a couple of quick slides here on the student achievement. Here are Stanford Achievement Test scores for, I believe this is first graders. The Experience Corps students are here in the purple bars. And from before the program was introduced over here to the left, here are the scores. After the program was introduced, the scores of the children exposed to Experience Corps volunteers went up versus children here in the back who were did not have exposure to the Experience Corps volunteers. And here are the number of suspensions for disciplinary reasons for the children in K through third grade. Overall pretty low, as you might imagine, but still the suspensions for the control children went up over time. Went up from before the program was introduced to after it was introduced for the controls who didn't get the program, versus big reductions in the number of suspensions for children in the Experience Corps schools. So we think that this model of Experience Corps has major implications as a social model for health promotion. It may be a vehicle to attract and retain more and more diverse older adults than standard intervention programs. It can be intentionally designed to enhance physical, cognitive, and social activity and providing a very stimulating environment. And it's an opportunity to invest in health promotion for older adults while not pitting the generations against each other, which is what we want to avoid. And it's cost beneficial by investing in older adults to invest in children, and perhaps it represents on a population level a way to improve the population's health. So here you see a picture of one of our schools, and you might recognize that gentleman in the middle of the picture. That's Martin OMalley, current presidential candidate. When this picture was taken, he was the mayor of Baltimore City. And the morning this picture was taken, he was supposed to stop by for about 10 minutes to see this school. And he came, he started to talk with the volunteers and the children, and he was so captivated by this program that he actually spent over an hour there. He canceled his other appointments, said, you know, I've got to wait and stay here. This is just too good to miss. And so he spent part of the morning with us, meeting with the volunteers and the children, and was a big proponent for expanding this Experience Corps program across Baltimore City, and now it's in over 25 schools in Baltimore City alone. Nationally, as I said, Experience Corps is now under the auspices of AARP Foundation, and there are here are the over 20 different cities throughout the country in which you can find these programs. I really hope there's some up here in New England, in New Haven, Connecticut, and in Boston, and Revere, Massachusetts. And I'm hoping that I can update this slide and actually put a Rhode Island site on this slide in the not too distant future. So certainly looking to expand this program because we think it has a lot of potential for both older adults and children. And I want to close here with a quote from Paul Baltus and his colleagues about the future of successful aging. That we maintain that the future of old age depends to a significant degree on making the images of aging more positive, empowering people to live healthy lives, and redesigning society to include more age-friendly technology, which is something we could all use, regardless of age, and opportunities for challenging and meaningful roles in old age. So that's it. Here's my contact information. Please feel free, if you want more information about the program, to either call or email me, and I would be happy to send you whatever material we have and share our experiences. And I want to thank you for your attention this morning.